The Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony regarding the challenges of recruiting and retaining a cybersecurity workforce. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good afternoon. I would like to begin by thanking our panel for taking the time today to be here and to testify. I appreciate your patience as we just finished up a vote series. I'm glad that you waited for us. Your thoughts and your opinions are very important to us and will help us help inform us as we oversee the Department of Homeland Security in meeting its cybersecurity workforce challenges. Cybersecurity is one of the most daunting national security and economic security challenges of our generation, and as our adversaries grow in sophistication, so too will the challenges associated with preventing their attacks. My colleagues on this committee have heard me say this often, but I'll say it again. America will remain the world superpower only so long as it remains the world cybersecurity superpower. As the lead civilian agency for our federal cybersecurity posture, the Department of Homeland Security factors as a critical piece of this equation. It is a tremendous privilege to chair this subcommittee, and I look forward to our continued partnership with the private sector and the administration on these important cybersecurity issues, because inaction is simply not an option. In 2014, it was estimated that $1 billion of personally identifiable information was stolen from cyber attacks. It is also estimated that the average cost of a data breach will be $150 million by 2020. Cyber attacks are growing in frequency and they're growing in their sophistication, but the availability of qualified cybersecurity professionals to deal with these challenges is unfortunately not keeping pace. There have been several studies over the past few years documenting the growing shortage of cybersecurity professionals. In this ever-increasing connected world, the problem is only going to get worse. One estimate from the consulting firm of Frost & Sullivan is forecasting a shortage of a staggering 1.8 million cybersecurity workers worldwide by 2022, just 5 years from now. Some industry estimates are that 53% of organizations now experience delays of 6 months or longer to find qualified cybersecurity candidates. We know that the entire industry is facing an unprecedented shortage of cybersecurity workers at all levels of competency, from frontline defenders to CIOs. It's against this backdrop that the Department of Homeland Security must compete with the private sector to recruit and retain the best talent possible in order to carry out its cybersecurity mission and to protect our critical infrastructure. Unfortunately, DHS's issues are compounded by the additional hiring challenges often felt by the federal government. DHS must work to overcome slow hiring processes and workforce supply and pipeline issues in order to build the essential workforce required to meet its cyber mission. DHS must strategically plan for the training, recruitment, and the retention of its cybersecurity workforce. The Homeland Security Committee passed several pieces of legislation that were signed into law to augment the cybersecurity workforce at DHS, including the Border Patrol Agent Reform Act of 2014 that expanded DHS's hiring authorities, allowing the department to better recruit and hire qualified cyber professionals. Unfortunately, these new authorities have not yet been fully implemented. This is an area where hearing from the experts before us today will provide valuable input as we conduct oversight of DHS's responsibilities and ensure that DHS has the human capital and resources necessary to carry out its important cybersecurity mission. The federal government supports a number of programs to recruit and retain its workforce. In particular, the Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service program was authorized in the National Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2014 and focuses on recruiting and training the next generation of information technology professionals, industry control system security professionals, and security managers. Working with DHS, the National Science Foundation has awarded grants for the Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service program since 2011 to increase and strengthen federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments' cyber workforce. As of January of 2017, there were 69 active Scholarship for Service institutions, including 8 in my home state of Texas. CyberCorps has provided scholarships to 2,945 recipients, with 2,223 graduates serving federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, and 623 students are currently working toward that goal. The recent interest my office has received from both 2- and 4-year colleges in my district about participating in the CyberCorps program is encouraging. It reinforces that stakeholders of all sizes from all corners of the country want to be part of the cybersecurity workforce solution. I look forward to a robust conversation with our distinguished panel of witnesses today that will support our efforts in strengthening DHS's effort to recruit and retain talented cybersecurity professionals. The Chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond.
Let me first thank the Chairman for holding this hearing, because our nation faces an evolving array of cyber threats, and it is crucial that we have a robust, talented cybersecurity workforce. For some time now, experts have predicted that the demand for cybersecurity professionals was quickly outpacing our supply. In 2012, the Bureau of Labor Statistics projected that by 2020, there would be 400,000 computer scientists available to fill 1.4 million computer science jobs. Recent estimates suggest that the deficit is growing instead of shrinking and may reach 1.8 million by 2022. Let's be clear, this is nothing short of a threat to our national security. These are the professionals we rely on to help us prepare for and respond to the next WannaCry, MARI, or Fancy Bear. These are the people who will prevent state-sponsored hackers from taking down our electrical grid or infiltrating our state election systems. And these are the experts we need to stand on the front lines during a major cyber attack and make sure we have functioning hospitals, banks, transportation systems, and lines of communication. We need cybersecurity professionals in the private sector protecting our intellectual property and personal data. And we need them in the public sector protecting our nation's most sensitive intelligence. Yet, we know that the federal government, and DHS in particular, is struggling to compete with the private sector for cyber talent. What's more, this administration has failed to fill even the most critical senior-level cybersecurity posts, asking agencies like DHS's National Programs and Protection Directorate to carry out broad, complex cybersecurity missions without a permanent undersecretary. This lack of leadership makes us vulnerable. We should be doing everything we can to right-size our cybersecurity labor force, and there's a lot more we can do. We need to introduce students to computers before they get to college, even the ones who go to schools that can't afford expensive tech programs and specialized instructors. I also believe there's untapped potential in vocational schools, 2-year programs, minority-serving institutions, and our historically black colleges and universities. And once we figured out how to get more people to choose cybersecurity as a career, we need to convince them to turn down a higher-paying job and spend some time in federal service. Within the federal government, we need to promote recruitment and retention programs, particularly at DHS, which has lagged behind other cyber-focused federal agencies like the NSA or FBI in attracting cyber talent. For its part, DHS needs to be more forward-thinking and learn to anticipate the needs of an evolving workforce that values professional development, a flexible work culture, the ability to transition in and out of positions or even fields. In closing, there is no question that the cyber workforce challenge is a daunting one, but the stakes are too high for us to ignore it. Last year, the global economy lost over $450 billion to cyber criminals, and over 2 billion personal records were stolen in the United States alone. Meanwhile, studies show that less than half of United States businesses would say that they are prepared for a cyber attack, and a small Main Street businesses are struggling the most. I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses today and hope we can identify innovative ways to work together to address cybersecurity workforce challenges. Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I'd like to submit for the record from Wesley Simpson, Chief Operating Officer of ISC Squared, along with the 2017 Global Information Security Workforce Study, Women in Cybersecurity in the report, the 2017 Global Information Security Workforce Study, U.S. federal government results. And I'd also ask unanimous consent that Ms. Berrigan be allowed to participate in today's hearing.
Without objection. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. As I mentioned before, we are very pleased to have this distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this vitally important topic. Dr. Frederick Chang is the Executive Director of the Darwin Deason Institute for Cybersecurity at Southern Methodist University. Dr. Chang, it's great to see you again, have a fellow Texan here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott Montgomery is the Vice President and Chief Technical Strategist of McAfee, and we welcome you back to the subcommittee as well. Dr. Michael Papay is the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer of Northrop Grumman. Dr. Papay, it's always good to see you, and thank you for being here today. And finally, Ms. Juliette Okafor is the Vice President of Global Business Development of Fortress Information Security. Ms. Okafor, welcome back to the subcommittee as well to you. I now ask all of the witnesses to stand and raise your right hand so I can swear you in to testify. Do each of you swear or affirm that the testimony which you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please let the record reflect that each of the witnesses has been so sworn, and you all may be seated. The witnesses' full written statements will appear in the record, and the chair is now pleased to recognize Dr. Chang for 5 minutes for his opening remarks.
Thank you. Chairman Ratcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today regarding the challenges associated with recruiting and retaining a cybersecurity workforce. My name is Frederick R. Chang, and I am the Executive Director of the Darwin Deason Institute for Cybersecurity at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. I am also the Bobby B. Lyle Centennial Distinguished Chair in Cybersecurity and Professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. I don't need to reiterate to this group the nature of today's cyber threats and their consequences. So I'll simply say that today's cyber insecurity is a multifaceted topic involving technology, policy, workforce, and more. In my brief comments now, I'll focus on the topic of workforce. One of the reasons why cyber compromises are so prevalent today is that there is a lack of trained and qualified personnel to defend the nation's cyber assets. This lack of trained cybersecurity workforce has been referred to as the cyber skills gap. The gap is large and growing, as Chairman Ratcliffe and Ranking Member Richmond have both mentioned. Hiring managers are having a hard time finding the talent they need right now, and there is a critical need for technical talent. Organizations will get creative in their hiring practices. I believe the market will work in some very innovative ways to adapt to the changing conditions by, for example, retraining some workers for roles in cyber and moving them around to manage the workload. And talent can and will be come from some unexpected places. I'm sure we'll hear some creative ideas from the other panelists. But the fact that the problem is growing is a serious issue because there have been a number of important activities that have been ongoing for a while now around the country in academia, in industry, and in government. And I'll quickly touch on just a few of them now. The NSA, DHS Centers of Academic Excellence, the DoD and NSF Cyber Scholarship programs have been good and useful programs and have helped to jumpstart and bolster university cybersecurity programs around the country. As universities grow their cyber portfolios to train more students, they will benefit from comprehensive curricular guidance, and important progress is being made on that front. Student cyber competitions are becoming increasingly popular. As long as we can ensure the right balance between the competitions and coursework, I'm a supporter of these competitions because I think they build depth of knowledge and they provide a valuable teaming experience which will be useful when the students enter the workforce. We're also seeing now more cyber summer camps for both middle and high school students, and I think these summer camps are quite important because they will help us grow a pool of cyber and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, motivated students. We need a larger pipeline of folks from which to recruit into key cyber positions. We will also see an increasing effort to advance technologies that will help automate different cybersecurity tasks, and this will assist in giving human cyber experts more time to perform other tasks that we will not be able to automate at the time. Let me close by saying that, in general, the actions that are being taken now are important, valuable, and are making a difference. But given that these actions are being taken and the fact that the cyber skills gap continues to grow tells me that we must do more. In 1958, science education in America got a shot in the arm when the National Defense Education Act was passed. The year after, the Soviet satellite Sputnik was launched into outer space. This act helped to launch a generation of students who would study math and science. So while we need to work very hard today to recruit and retain urgent cyber positions today and in the near future, I hope we can also consider the future of cyberspace. How secure will it be? How will we defend it? Today's students will be responsible for designing, creating, operating, maintaining, and defending tomorrow's cyber infrastructure. We need a large and capable pool of folks to staff these positions for the future. Thank you again for allowing me to be here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Chair now recognizes Mr. Montgomery for his opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Ratcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, and members of the subcommittee. Thanks very much for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Scott Montgomery, Vice President and Chief Technical Strategist of McAfee, one of the world's leading independent cybersecurity companies. Inspired by the power of working together, McAfee creates enterprise, government, and consumer solutions that make the world a safer place. As a group, we've studied this well-documented workforce shortage for several years now, and we need to do something about it immediately. Following are some of recommendations for training and incentivizing more people and also using technology to help fill the gap. First, we should expand programs that are working today, such as the NSF Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service Program, which manages to retain an impressive 80% of its graduates as workers for the federal government. We should also consider expanding this program to focus on community colleges. These institutions tend to attract a diverse variety of students, including recent high school grads, but also returning veterans and other adult students who might be working full or part-time. I want to recognize Full Committee Chairman McCall's Cyber Scholarship Opportunities Act and its Senate counterpart that was recently voted out of committee. Both require the SFS program to include students pursuing an associate's degree in cybersecurity without the intent of transferring to a four-year institution. The public sector as well as the private sector have thorny challenges in attracting and retaining cybersecurity talent. At the very high level, there are three categories of government cyber professionals. There are operators, the people who implement and keep security technology running, researchers who explore the latest in cyber defense, and finally, analysts, experts that can respond to an event in the first few minutes. It's this third area where government and the private sector have the most serious need. Congress gave DHS expedited hiring authority for cybersecurity 3 years ago, an authority that could address many of the suggestions. It's incumbent upon the department not only to move these plans forward, but also to come up with creative ways to address the known pay disparity between the public sector and the private sector, whether this is through accelerated grades or accelerated retirement packages. There has to be some creative way where we can address the pay disparity. We should also explore creative ways to enable the public and private sectors to share talent. Adversaries are constantly innovating and changing course. It's unrealistic to think that government cyber practitioners will be able to keep up with a rapidly evolving environment by themselves. We should design a mechanism for cyber professionals to move back and forth between the public and private sector so that the government organizations would have a continual refresh of expertise, much like the National Guard. We should work quickly to solve this cyber workforce challenge, but in the meantime, while we still have this gap, we must rely on technology, such as moving to the cloud and using automation wisely. We can automate lower-level tasks, freeing up personnel to serve in key roles that humans can best fill. Those are the analysts who can use creative and insight to determine why an attacker might have chosen a particular attack method or target, or how best to respond to an incident. When considering the role of security technologies, it's important to understand the market-like forces that drive the effectiveness of cybersecurity defense. Information technologies continuously improve over time. Paradoxically, cyber defenses do not follow this pattern. Their effectiveness peaks shortly after release and degrades quickly thereafter. When a new defensive capability is first released, adversaries don't take much notice, but once it's deployed at scale, they adopt evasion tactics and countermeasures, causing the effectiveness to degrade significantly. We also see the current paradigm of constant integration of point products as ineffective and unsustainable, particularly given the substantial number of cyber professionals needed to knit together these disparate systems. Not only are technology efficiencies already declining by the time the lengthy acquisition and deployment cycles are complete, but organizations are unable to deal with the complexity of what they've acquired and deployed. An approach where technology enabled with strong collaboration can be deployed rapidly to security platforms using open source communication means as required. Both the public and private sector organizations need their tools to utilize these kinds of open source communication mechanisms. No single industry partner can cover the vast spectrum of security and privacy problems or catch every issue every time. Only by working collaboratively in the private and public sectors can we defeat cyber attackers. I look forward to our discussion and will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Chair now recognizes Dr. Pape for 5 minutes for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Ratcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, and members of the subcommittee for hosting today's important hearing. As our government, military, and society become increasingly dependent upon digital technology, it is a national and economic security imperative to ensure that we have a cyber-trained workforce to meet this demand. My name is Dr. Michael Pape, and I'm the Vice President of Cyber Initiatives and the Chief Information Security Officer for Northrop Grumman, a leading cyber provider across the federal government. As critical as technology is, at Northrop Grumman, we firmly believe that our employees are the single most important aspect of cybersecurity, and we have made it a top priority to not only support the development of a larger cyber-qualified workforce globally, but also to increase its diversity. Like DHS and the federal government, Northrop Grumman can offer prospective employees something unique, the opportunity to do really exciting, cutting-edge work that is vital to our national security. For many cyber professionals, it is this sense of mission that drives them. In 2012, I had the privilege of participating in the Homeland Security Advisory Council Task Force on Cyber Skills. I applaud DHS for adopting many of the task force recommendations, including additional cyber training, which Northrop Grumman provided to hundreds of DHS employees. Northrop Grumman has also incorporated the majority of these recommendations into our internal cyber workforce strategy. At Northrop Grumman, we look at the continuum of education, from elementary school through the professional ranks, to build a diverse, highly skilled workforce. The Northrop Grumman Foundation is honored to be the presenting sponsor of the Air Force Association's Cyber Patriot Program, a youth team cyber defense competition which boasted over 4,400 teams from all 50 states last year. While most STEM programs report a female participation rate around 12%, I'm especially proud that Cyber Patriot boasts 23% female participation. Northrop Grumman is actively engaged with universities across the country to help to develop curriculum, fund hands-on student research and development projects, and educate future cyber professionals. Because cyber is such a complicated and dynamic challenge, we need a workforce that brings with it a diversity of thought, culture, education, experience, and problem solving. Diversity drives innovation and breeds success. Therefore, in many cases, we are specifically targeting investments to increase the participation of women and underrepresented groups in the cyber profession. For example, cyber scholars at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the Cyber Warrior Diversity Program at Morgan State University and Coppin State University. As part of our retention efforts and to support their growth, we rotate cyber professionals around the company to keep them engaged and challenged, while also offering ongoing educational and training opportunities. We even developed our own in-house cyber academy to provide our employees, customers, and even policymakers with the macro understanding and technical skills cyber often requires. A few final thoughts to leave the committee with. On clearances, beyond just a shortage of cyber professionals, there is also a lack of cleared cyber professionals. We need to figure out ways to improve the clearance process to ensure that both the federal government and contractors have the cleared employees to do all the critical national security work that is required. More cyber-trained federal employees. Cyber training across the federal government is inconsistent. The federal government as a whole needs to put a greater emphasis on ensuring its employees have the cyber understanding and tools to effectively and securely do their jobs. Increased partnerships and coordination. There is no single answer to addressing the shortage of cyber workers. Continuing to work across academia, government, and industry is essential to leveraging investments, best practices, and collectively working together to ensure that our great nation continues to securely grow and prosper in this increasingly digital age. I would be happy to answer any questions, and Northrop Grumman looks forward to working with the subcommittee on this effort. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Pepe. The chair now recognizes Ms. Okafor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Radcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, and members of the House Homeland Security Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection. I'm pleased to appear before you today to discuss the challenges of addressing the severe people problem that hinders our ability to address the advancing threat against our nation's critical infrastructure. Technology alone cannot bridge the increasing skills gap our federal government continues to face in recruiting and retaining highly skilled cybersecurity talent. Similar to the private sector, it is our belief that the federal government must take a more innovative approach to the recruitment and retention of our future cyber workforce. My name is Juliet Okafor, JD, Vice President of Business Development for Fortress Information Security and Strategic Advisory Board member for the ICMCP, the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals. I am the first Black and female employee of Fortress Information Security, a minority-owned cyber risk intelligence and management startup based in Orlando, Florida. Fortress was founded in 2015 by two serial entrepreneurs who sought to apply practical business intelligence to address the most complex and emerging challenges across IT, OT, and third-party risk management facing the global critical infrastructure. Our approach to the market, bundling analytics-enabled security risk orchestration technology, risk governance, and the people. It stemmed from the constant concern reported by CISOs of the world's largest organizations about their ability to hire skilled security staff to fill critical technical security roles. In May 2016, I joined the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals as the first female co-chairwoman of the Strategic Advisory Board. I lead strategic planning and roadmap development for strategic initiatives, partnerships, and community outreach. And in this role, spend much of my time listening to the efforts taken by the largest global corporations, small businesses, and educational institutions regarding building a talented, diverse, highly diverse, and innovative cyber workforce, and then identifying opportunities, programs, tools, and processes that we can implement with these enterprises to leverage and expand diversity and inclusion programs. The key organizational objectives of ICMCP are: 1, to increase the number of female and minority students pursuing cybersecurity-related disciplines at both the undergraduate and postgraduate levels by funding scholarship opportunities. Facilitate the career advancement of existing member cybersecurity practitioners through mentoring and grants, leading to advanced degrees and/or professional certifications in the field of cybersecurity. Promote public awareness of cybersecurity and the opportunities for minorities and underrepresented groups in the profession. Number 4, function as a representative body on issues and developments that affect the careers of minority and women cybersecurity professionals. And number 5, establish a mechanism for gathering and disseminating information towards minorities and underrepresented groups. In my testimony today, I will highlight the challenges being faced across the public and private sectors in recruitment and retention of cybersecurity talent. These challenges are compounded for diverse populations, which face issues with career advancement for existing diverse practitioners and retention challenges that also exist in keeping diverse talent once they're recruited. I'll also discuss the efforts and progress made by large and small enterprises, grassroots, and nonprofits like the organizations I represent today, and the efforts that they're making to address the cybersecurity industry's largest and most critical vulnerability, the human factor. Our research shows that these challenges extend across government and private sector, with scarce talent and high demand, making it even more critical to focus efforts on increasing capacity. As noted in the Cybersecurity National Action Plan and 2017 budget, the goal remains to identify, recruit, develop, retain, and expand the pipeline of the best, brightest, and most diverse cybersecurity talent for federal service and for our nation. Additionally, a 2014 CIA Diversity and Leadership Study commissioned by the director of the CIA, one of the nation's largest intelligence and security agencies, cited that the lack of diversity in its leadership ranks is of great concern and that diversity is critical to the mission. The agency further stated that a lack of diversity of thought and experience was identified by congressional committees and independent commissions as a contributing factor to past intelligence failures, and that diversity is mission critical. That diversity is mission critical is no longer a debatable proposition, if it ever was. I thank you for allowing me to speak with you today.
Thank you, Ms. Okafor. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. I want to start out by thanking you all again for your very thoughtful opening statements. Dr. Chang, I want to start with you because I know in addition to your prior federal experience at NSA, you're now essentially on the front lines teaching and educating our future cyber workforce. And so I'd like your perspective on whether working for a larger purpose factors into whether students will choose to serve the government. In other words, does the potential of protecting our homeland and working at a classified level, is that a real incentive for our students and young people?
Yes, I believe it is. I on occasion have the opportunity to chat with students about career choices, about individual opportunities they may seek. And it would be fair to say that for a number of the students, they believe that there is potentially something larger than just salary. Now, clearly salary will have a bearing, but I did have one particular student who, by the way, is a veteran, former Marine. The guy is a rock star. He is a terrific cyber performer. Any company represented here, I think, would really enjoy having him. He specifically made the point that for him and many of people that he knows would basically choose mission over money. They want to have an impact. They want to make a difference. They're trained. They're ready. They want to get in the game. And to the extent that they understand that, whatever organization will allow them and their skills to make a difference, they would absolutely raise the hand.
Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Montgomery, with so much focus in recent years about expanding cyber educational opportunities like we've talked about in your opening statement as well, why do you think the cyber skills gap is getting worse?
Well, demand. The number of, think about what's under control of most organizations. They control the number of people that they can hire. They control the budget for technology. Another static factor is the number of hours in a day. That doesn't change. But think about what does change dynamically. The number of systems that you use in your own household, for example, rages beyond control. Where I remarked to a reporter today, I have 5 more IP-enabled devices in my book bag today than I did 5 years ago. And I don't see that trend diminishing. So demand, and I don't mean demand for the skills of the personnel, I mean the demand upon those personnel themselves. So if you have these dynamic factors, the number of systems, the attacks against those systems, the lucrative nature of cybercrime, the interconnectivity of devices to just about everything these days, it creates an untenable math problem that the practitioner can't solve by himself. So we don't have enough kids coming in. We all know that. But we're also making the existing problem of the existing practitioner worse because of the raw demand of compute power.
Terrific. Thank you. Dr. Pape, what programs have you found to be most effective for your company's recruiting and retention efforts? And are there metrics at Northrop Grumman that are used to sort of judge the success and failure of recruitment and retention programs? Obviously, one of the purposes of this is we're trying to learn from some of the private sector best practices and whether or not those can apply or should apply in the federal sector.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we approach the problem just like any other business would. Where do you want to spend your money? Where do you want to invest your time and energy in looking at, first of all, the recruiting side and then on the retention side? So let me just give you a few numbers, like some metrics that we look at for Cyber Patriot, for instance. If we look at the Cyber Patriot participation of the students that are coming in there in the middle schools and high schools, about 87% of the kids that are in that program go on to pursue a STEM degree in college. That's a pretty good number. And then you look at how many of those kids go on and get a college degree and come work at big companies or go work at for the government, then how long can you keep them with the company? So we look at numbers like something like 92% of those kids that come out of Cyber Patriot programs and then come into work for Northrop Grumman as an intern or as a summer hire, about 92% of them come back again and stay and either continue their education or continue their career with us or both. And so you got to think about where you want to invest your money and where you want to spend the time. And I think the federal government can look at that like a business.
Terrific. My time's expired. Chair now recognizes the ranking minority member for his questions.
Sure, and Dr. Chang, I'll just start with a comment where you are. So if you look at SMU, whose tuitions give or take somewhere around $45,000 a year, not including room and board, the demand upon students as they come out of college now, the financial demand is a serious obstacle as we talk about
I found something on the way for as obstacle as we talk about.
Well, maybe somebody has a solution for it. Who knows? But so the question becomes, and I think that you're right when you start talking about supply and demand and you start talking about the overall good of the country. Demand is so high right now, whether you're talking about Samsung and a refrigerator that hooks up to the Internet of Things, or you're talking about my sous vide device where I can cook over Wi-Fi at my home while I'm here in D.C. and it's in New Orleans. So the demand is very extraordinary, which then, and the supply is still limited, and it's going to be limited for a while. So the question I have is, as government, how do we think out the box? How do we do things in a creative manner to create some capacity? And how do we compete for those students who have a number of challenges that that they have to deal with? And just as a side, do you know any state or local governments that are doing a good job at retention or recruitment?
I'll offer a couple of thoughts. So I think there is sort of this notion of top-down and bottom-up. So the bottom-up perspective basically says when students graduate, they kind of know and follow where the other students go. So if they join a company or an organization and the students say, hey, that's a really great place, come join me, they sort of keep track of each other. So there is this sort of bottom-up perspective. If you get some number of students, they may attract some others. I think there's also sort of a top-down perspective as well that says if DHS, for example, were able to recruit a really big-name cyber professional, that would be a little bit of a magnet for some other students. So think maybe some Fortune 500 CISO or something like that, or somebody, some big name out of government. I do think the students would say, gosh, that's somebody I admire, that's somebody I respect, somebody I can learn from. Might be an interesting strategy as well.
Anyone else? Ms. Okafor.
Thank you. I believe that cybersecurity has a branding problem. And one of the biggest inhibitors in my conversations with students and practitioners looking to enter the field from non-IT related industries is that it's mostly military, or it is seen as highly technical with penetration testing. It sort of, in some situations, lacks the kind of cool that I think a lot of millennials are looking towards when they're looking to build out their career. And then when you talk about the federal government, when you think about some of the issues that we're facing in society today, some people are reticent to enter something that both seems very, sort of situated around military and then institutionally based. So one of the things that I noticed is a number of years ago when and I won't share my age, but when I was growing up, I saw a number of commercials as a young black woman who grew up in Brooklyn about the military and the benefits the military had very early on for a commitment up front. You got a lot on the back end. I think cybersecurity needs to really start to broaden its awareness of the opportunities in it and get people to invest in the mission very early on. And that will then allow them to, as they're being sort of approached by other industries, it's not just the money, because they're aware of what the benefits are, and they also understand what the task is that they would be a part of. And so I think that would be much more helpful with regards to the branding issue I see.
Thank you. And I guess just from my perspective, and you all can just tell me if you agree, part of it is just that when you work for government, it's so rigid. And when you're in the cybersecurity space, or really coding space, or whatever you want to call it, the days of wearing a suit, the days of all of this structure are really going away because people have the ability to work anywhere and work in any kind of environment. Are we perpetuating our own barrier by our traditional means of how we think about the workplace as opposed to what technology offers? And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. But a yes or no or a sentence would help.
Yes. I'll expand a little bit. One of the things that I think and to Ms. Okafor's point, cyber doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't know buildings. It doesn't know facilities. It doesn't know data centers. It doesn't know anything. It knows where the demand is. So the notion of going to the same cube to work on something that affects someone in Ohio versus Montana versus Texas, it is a little bit across purposes, absolutely.
All right, Chair now recognizes gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing. I want to thank our distinguished panel for being here, and appreciate the contributions that each of you have made in your own right to advancing the field of cybersecurity. So, Mr. Chairman, in March's NIST's National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education issued a request for information on the scope and sufficiency of efforts to educate and train the nation's cybersecurity workforce. And I responded to highlight several areas that I hope that they will focus on. And I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, if I could, for the letter that I sent to be included in the record as context for my questions for the distinguished panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to the panel, in all of your testimony, you point out that there's a strong demand signal for more cybersecurity workers. Yet, and you in particular, Dr. Chang, as it can appreciate, as this is one of the members of the CSIS task force with me and Chairman McCall, and I thank you for your work there. But to understand that it's not a new problem. The demand signal really has existed for well over a decade now, and one of the biggest challenges that policymakers have faced, in my view, is figuring out why there really hasn't been more of a market-driven response to the shortage. So based on your experiences, why has the cybersecurity workforce gap lagged behind the broader computer science gap, which has seemed much more responsive to the growing demand for software engineers?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I think it's very thoughtful when you make a comparison between cybersecurity and computer science. So the field of computer science as a major has been around for many years now, as you know. In terms of a specific discipline for cybersecurity, it is very new. It seems to us that we've been sort of thinking about cybersecurity for a very long time, but as a discipline distinct from computer science, computer engineering, information technology, it really is very new. So as students begin taking some of these programs from these different universities, they're not getting the same thing. So I mentioned in my testimony the idea that when universities begin building up their cybersecurity programs, there really needs to be a common curricular guidance so that everybody basically says cybersecurity is kind of the same thing. Because right now it's a little bit of a mix and match, and so you'll get a major or a minor or a certificate or something, but you're not getting quite the same thing. So it's still a little bit of a new thing. I think it's now public awareness has raised, but it is still basically a pretty infant discipline.
Thank you.
I would agree, but I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's demand. It's demand. The demand for practitioners has far outpaced the ability for the educational system to deliver, because we've changed everything. You didn't buy anything on your telephone 10 years ago. Many of us didn't buy anything on the internet 10 years ago. Many of us didn't have broadband to our house 10 years ago. Certainly no one had an internet-connected refrigerator or television 10 years ago. So it's absolutely I don't think that it's a lack of interest or a lack of programs. I don't think it's a lack of educational institutions offering education. I think it is nascent from the cybersecurity as a discipline standpoint, but we simply have far more demand than our ability to fulfill, and that will worsen as more devices are IP enabled. A Patriot missile has an IP address while it's in flight. That's going to get worse before it gets better.
Thank you. Congressman Langevin, if I may agree with Scott here for a second, that I know it doesn't happen often. The demand is building up because all of the things that are out there that are legacy systems as well are now possible attack targets. So even think about DHS's mission, not just one from a responsibility to provide information out to businesses and government organizations through U.S. CERT, but also the work that DHS does in TSA and CBP. All those are opportunities for people who are cyber trained to become part of DHS's mission and protect the systems that DHS delivers for our nation. So the demand may be even more than we see up front because of that number of legacy systems that are out there that need protection.
Thank you.
And I would add a caveat that it's not the demand itself, but the lack of response to the demand, meaning we're not changing fast enough with regard to the systems that we have in place. For instance, the ranking member talked about, sort of the rigidity of the federal government. And I am also often concerned with the kind of education that exists to prepare people for a cybersecurity job. You need more hands-on learning. But often you're still seeing these certificate programs come up that teach using just books. So what happens? They graduate school, and then it becomes the company's responsibility to invest in training the workforce to actually start on day one. So there's a gap there because organizations are not quickly responding due to bureaucracy or politics to the demand of the new workforce. And then finally, we talk about technology as an enabler. But I want to talk about the fact that technology is engineered by people. And unless we address the fact that people still continue to have unconscious bias and are reticent to change, and therefore it's impacting our ability to hire quickly enough to bring on the right people to address the demand. Thank you.
Thank you. I know my time's expired. I thank all of you for your insights into this. I just, I just see the fact that computer scientists are learning new language, new things are being coded. I mean, web programming languages are brand new, and apps are have only existed for a decade. But there are plenty of app coders, but we don't see enough market demand moving into cybersecurity, I would say, filling those roles. And it's, we have a couple 100,000 openings right now in the cybersecurity field, and we just don't. It doesn't seem like that we're migrating enough in terms of training enough people in that field. So it's a challenge. But I know my time's expired. I'll yield back, and I'll perhaps have some questions for the panel that I'll submit for the record. Thank you.
I'll advise the gentleman I intend to have a second round if you're interested in staying around. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses and welcome, and particularly to you, Ms. Okafor, who's from my hometown. What a very interesting topic. I want to thank our chairman and ranking member for it. Mr. Montgomery, I'd just like to go back to what you were saying about demand. I spent a lot of years in law enforcement, and we used to talk a lot about being proactive and not reactive. DHS was created 17 years ago or so to change the way we do business. So did we just not see the demand coming, or did the internet exceed our wildest dreams?
Can it be both? If I had told you when Homeland was founded, what you would be able to do from the confines of your pocket on your phone, would you have believed it? I believe that the pace of technology has accelerated so dramatically in the last 20 years, so much faster than the prior 200. The things that we do and take for granted today, they simply didn't exist 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think we're always going to err on the side of availability and progress. And there is definitely contention between availability and progress and security and privacy. The practitioner's first job is to say, no, you can't do that. It's new. I don't understand it yet. But what do we say as consumers? Hey, I just need it to work. So there is definitely contention. I don't think the government missed the boat or missed the size of the problem any more than anyone else did. It's simply a question of the pace outpacing our ability to respond. And I don't think that's a government issue. I think that happens in every organization, whether they're in the private sector or not.
You also talked about a shared workforce, if you will, combining a private and public sector employee to do both jobs. I think the pros of that are very, very obvious. Could you talk about some of the cons of having that kind of work environment?
Well, certainly clearances and the clearance process make it trickier for certain systems to be protected. But let's face it, the overwhelming percentage of systems and the overwhelming percentage of data are unclassified. And certainly as the department moves towards the cloud and embraces that economy of scale like everyone else, that rotating workforce could be relegated to the cloud management aspects, which are more public. So I think there are ways to offset sort of the recurring nature or the temporary nature of workers by simply relegating them to more unclassified roles. I see tremendous benefit in that a private citizen may not understand what the word mission means until they're exposed to it. Certainly my own, I'm a software engineer by background. but my own exposure to the word mission came with involvement in the Department of Defense, and I take that word more seriously now than I did when I was a kid in the cube. I think the same thing could be said of these cyber partnerships between the private and public sector.
Thank you. Ms. Okafor, in a study that was done in this year involving women who had worked or working in cybersecurity, over half of them reported that they had been discriminated against in some way. You certainly talked about being a first and on more than one occasion. I'd like to hear about your own experiences of discrimination within the field and hear some more about what recommendations you would make for employees on the private and the public sector to create an environment that's more conducive to recruiting women and other minorities.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. So it is, you know, it is not easy to be the first Black woman, but I wear it as a badge of honor. One of the biggest areas of discrimination I face tends to be overt. There's a subtlety, mostly, of a suggestion that I perhaps don't know what I'm talking about or perhaps need to be explained. And I find often that I need my male coworkers to vouch for some of my big ideas, unlike some of my male counterparts. And so I can't say that in my experience I've faced anything that would sort of, you know, touch anything near some more overt forms of racial discrimination, but there are lots of conversations that I'm not included in. Because lots of the dealing happens after hours in places that perhaps they don't think I would perhaps be welcome. And so what I suggest for organizations is really starting to question itself. I talk a lot about organizations conducting both third-party and self-assessments of the culture. The culture of an organization is critical not only with regard to who they're hiring and who's in the organization, but also an unhappy, unproductive workforce cannot be a secure workforce. And so those two are linked, and therefore an organization needs to understand how it treats its employees, how it's perceived by the market with regard to attracting employees, and then ensuring that they give opportunities for women to be seen as having the right frame of mind, the right thoughts on big projects, to have executives that they can see as being perhaps an ideal that they could perhaps reach. And so I feel like you can no longer separate the need for diversity of thought, gender, racial diversity, without also saying that without doing that, you're impacting directly the ability to secure the organization, secure the nation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and I am out of
I'm sorry, if I could
Mr.
just
Chairman.
add briefly.
Okay, please go.
I can't agree enough. No insider threat starts their career as a threat to their organization. It's through cultural pressure, cultural unhappiness. We've seen this at TSA, on the front lines. No one starts unhappy. It's their environmental pressures that creates insider threat. So totally agree on checking your culture and reassessing from time to time. Thank
you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko.
Thank you all for being here. I constantly hear from my constituents back home about this issue, about the whole cybersecurity issue, and they're terrified. And getting it right is critically important. And I really kind of commend both of you for the last colloquy you had, because it's really important to have the discussions. And you can't make change until you identify the problem. And once you identify the problem, then you can address it. So I encourage you to continue to speak up and let us know how we can help, if in any way. So it's a very important issue, and keep it up. But Dr. Montgomery, I want to talk a bit about this, the public-private sector cross-pollination, I call it, or pollination, whatever you want to call it. I'm very interested in that, and I think it's something that can be a very dynamic thing. I'm also interested in how we can better expand that and better utilize that moving forward as a way to get people from both the government sector and the private sector to get on the same page more, instead of having this more stratified relationship that we have now. So you'd like to comment on that a little bit? I'd like to have others as well. So,
sure. So first and foremost, having some industry influence inside the confines of government is never going to be a bad thing. Exposing permanent government employees.
So what you're saying is people in government don't always know everything that's right for industry?
I would never say it
That's
that way
shocking.
specifically.
Well, I am. I'm telling you, that's why we want to do it.
But I think that sharing of ideas, there's certainly process in the government that has to be observed with respect to data classification. But beyond that that rigid wall, the whole reason that enterprise works and industry works is because it's allowed to try to solve problems more creatively. The other thing I think that helps a lot with respect to a visiting workforce, so to speak, is the diversity of that workforce itself. Many of them will be returning veterans whose experience in the most difficult places on earth lends itself pretty well to crisis situations in a civilian organization as well. But if you think about visiting professionals, you may wind up having all sorts of diversity, whether it's racial diversity, whether it's more women in the workplace, but that constant influx of new ideas is how problems get solved. The way cybersecurity is almost, when you look at the highest ends of the practitioners, it's almost more like an art than a science. And it takes a lot of different points of view. And right now, we don't have enough points of view, including more people who aren't necessarily, quote unquote, cyber practitioners to be some of these rotating personnel. Will sharpen the ideas of the cyber practitioners, being exposed to those ideas in the cyber workplace. I can't say enough about how this will help spur new thinking, both in the private sector as well as the public sector.
Yeah, and with the Department of Homeland Security has just secured its first loaned executive, as they call it, and I think we need more. And I say that because even in my subcommittee, which I chair, the TSA and Protective Service Subcommittee, we now have a Secret Service agent that's detailed to us. And he's giving us a totally different perspective on the Secret Service side of things. And so I totally agree with it. And you see a lot of colonels come through here, and they do their time, if you will, on Capitol Hill before they become a general. They have to understand how this place works if they're ever going to be able to be effective at their jobs as a generals for the most part. So I'd like to hear from you all, not just that it's a good idea. How can we expand it? What can we do better with that? And what would you suggest we do? And go ahead, Dr. Pape, you want to try?
Sure. So one of the things that as you're facing this big demand, a shortage of people, we're never going to fill the gap by just keep continuing to funnel new kids in the bottom. You're not going to get to 1.8 million jobs in 2022 doing it that way. So the importance of information sharing now becomes clear in our role as cyber defenders. I share information on a tactical level and a strategic level with both my defense industrial base partners and the government counterparts. We need to adopt a much more broad information sharing approach that takes advantage of the fact that my folks now don't have to find every threat targeted at my company because somebody else over there found that threat first. Let me know about it, and I put it in automatically, automatic information sharing. I'm up, I'm good, and I'm protected. So I think scalable solutions are the key, and information sharing is one of those. I don't think we realized it at the time when we were thinking about, hey, we got to get information sharing more broad. It's a scalable solution that helps us solve that gap.
Ms. Okafor?
And I would agree with him. Two of the examples that I've seen that work really, really brilliantly is when you have the public and private sector actually collaborate around a goal. I've seen cyber exercises in particular industries. So for instance, maritime security via U.S. Coast Guard. They've been doing these exercises all across the country where they're inviting U.S. Coastal Guard cybersecurity professionals in addition to industry, and they're actually doing exercises together. So they can each come to the table with what they know and actually solve a problem. I've also seen this done with GridX, which is an initiative led by the Department of Energy. And all of the energy companies who are naturally sharing information, they come together to work to do tabletop exercises, cybersecurity workshops, and this is an opportunity in a much more informal setting to actually have a real conversation. I think the problem with the public and private sector, they speak different languages. And oftentimes in these very rigid hierarchical structures, people are not willing to share. And so these are some of the things I've seen in real life that actually have people leave and they feel much more enlightened than they started.
Thank you. Dr. Chang, have you got anything?
Yeah, I'll mention information sharing, though, in a different way. So at our university, there is a security group where students meet on their own time, voluntarily, once a week, to basically share information with each other. You see that they're exploring different career options. One of the sessions they have is to basically bring companies in to kind of describe what those companies do. So when you're a student, maybe you've heard of Google or Facebook or Microsoft or something. You probably haven't heard of DHS or TSA or Customs and Border Protection or something. And so, to the extent to which students find out that, gosh, working at this particular organization has a really cool cyber mission, they just wouldn't know. So, the extent that you can kind of get the word out there, I think would be quite appealing. And students really do. They're sponges. They're soaking it up, and so they actively seek information. And if the word got out there a little bit more that there's an interesting cyber mission, that would be helpful.
It just seems to me that a great way to do it is a cross-pollination, and I hope we can continue to expand this. And if there's ideas you think about later of what we can do to incentivize that or do something, it should go both ways. I mean, we wouldn't hurt people from Capitol Hill to come work in industry for 6 months and see that side of it as well, to definitely give them a different perspective. Especially there's pay disparity between the two, so maybe that's not such a good idea. But it is very, very important, and I encourage you all to partake in as best you can, and we're going to endeavor to do the same. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Berrigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I represent a majority-minority district. It's about 75% Latino and African American. And I recently read a report that said only about 12% of the information security workforce was made up of African American, Asian Americans, and Latinos. What is the cybersecurity industry doing to ensure a more representative workforce? Well, go ahead. You want to start?
Okay. So yes, the fact you stated is completely correct. The activities are disparate, and I think that's part of the problem is not a lot of the organizations are working together. But what we're seeing from the large organizations like a McAfee, like Google, Facebook, what they're doing is most recently Google actually put a new Howard University campus on its campus in order to start to raise awareness of minority students about the opportunities at Google. What we've also seen is a rise in those organizations sponsoring HBCU programs, doing college tours that take into consideration HBCUs and primarily Hispanic serving institutions. And what they're attempting to do is, instead of expecting, as in the past, that minorities and women would find them, they're actually going out into those communities and using the channels that they know those communities actually look to for additional information. What they're also trying to do is sort of broaden overall awareness with, sort of social activism, things that, that represent strongly with women, taking part in some of the urban community events that typically, they might not typically be seen. And then more than anything, actually doing career days where they're having their employees go on site, do either lunch and learns that I've seen, or they're actually doing workshops with some of the students just to talk to them about the opportunities. So the activities have not been combined, and I think that might be part of the problem. But what I've seen is a frequency, an increasing amount of frequency in the activities that they're conducting.
So the district I represent also is a very low-income community. The median income is about $44,000. Only about 11% of students go on to college. So everything I'm hearing is having the word college in it. On college this is happening. You're telling me, a lot of college tours. What about the students who don't want to do a 4-year? What kind of opportunities are there for them in this workforce, and what can we do to make sure that they're not left out? And before I let you answer, you know, I used to be on a council in a very affluent city called Hermosa Beach, and they had something called U-Code, and you could sign up as a student and you could go after school. It was expensive, and even people there said it was not affordable. You don't see anything like that in Compton or Watts, where I represent, and certainly it would be very challenging for people there to send their kids to something that's so expensive. So what can we do to make sure we don't leave these communities out?
So, ma'am, one of the great examples of that is a partnership we just started with the National Society of Black Engineers, where, like you say, you reach out to them through these societies where you can reach a larger population. This is it's an integrated pipeline program to provide 72 engineering students with $8,000 scholarship grants at historically black colleges and universities. And you don't have to go to a 4-year university to get into the cyber program. You know, we're hiring kids in high school and getting them started that early. And then if they want to stop after 2 years and then work on some certifications, that's what you need to get started in cyber. Then you continue if they're interested. Hey, I want to go on for a further degree. Great, we'll support that. But you got to reach into them early and say, here's an opportunity for a scholarship. If you don't have a lot of money, great chance to go to a school nearby and get started.
And also, the idea of the lack of, you know, either the pipeline or the lack of ability to attract talent often comes down to dollars and cents. And the digital divide is a big issue, with a number of minorities and Latino students not having the same access to technology at a younger age as some of their white counterparts, white peers. And so a number of institutions like Symantec, they're donating some of their technology to schools in areas with primarily underrepresented groups. I've seen that quite a bit. The other thing that I'm seeing is a rise in the number of apprenticeships that are available to either students in vocational programs and junior colleges or high school students who demonstrate that an ability to pass a certain criteria or a test. And in doing so, what they're doing is building loyalty to the organization early on, but they're also creating hands-on learning that will allow them to be ready on day one, with the organization making the initial investment in that talent and saying, we think you're important enough to invest our money and our resources to train you. So that there's a preponderance of apprenticeships, hands-on learning programs, internships that are focusing on junior colleges, community colleges, and also vocational institutions.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for coming to our subcommittee hearing. I'm going to exercise my discretion as the chairman to ask a second round of questions. Invite any members that want to do that. I'll recognize you as well. Really for the purpose of asking one question, I think we've had a great discourse on some of the areas where we need to focus, some of the solutions. But with respect to the overall goal here of assisting the Department of Homeland Security in accomplishing its cyber mission, I want to make sure that I've given each of you the opportunity to highlight the most important and the most immediate steps that you think DHS can take to mitigate the shortage of cybersecurity workers at the department. I know, you know, Mr. Montgomery, you know, you've identified the cyber core, expanding that as one of the things. So I don't mean, it's not intended to be redundant, but I want to make sure that we've captured everything valuable that you all might be able to relate to us. So I'll just go down in order and start with you, Dr. Chang.
Okay. So as I mentioned, occasionally I have conversations with students about career choices and so forth. And I expressly put to them the question, if you were motivated to work for the government, kind of what do you think? So the organizations that kind of rose to the top for them were NSA and FBI. One student actually mentioned that they had watched CSI Cyber on TV and thought that was really cool. So don't know how many other students watch CSI Cyber, but you know, maybe that sort of rose the, created a little bit more demand for FBI. And so I think it's really important, again, to kind of raise awareness. Another thing that comes up, and I think this is important, the students come out of school at the top of their game, and they're technically really sharp. They kind of want to stay sharp. And if they thought that they'd move to an organization that weren't using the best tools, that didn't have the best people, they would be less motivated to go there. So I'd really encourage the idea that it's a place that's sort of at the leading edge. You get to work with really cool people. It's got a great mission. These are some of the thoughts that the students have.
Terrific. Thank you, Dr. Chang.
So two things I think that are immediate. One, I would echo Dr. Pape's comments on information sharing. If there's an incident at CBP, and it's a system that exists in every other portion of the department, CBP should automatically share that information to the rest of the department. It shouldn't be a discussion. It shouldn't be a committee. It shouldn't be tabled. It should be automatic. So if a system's attacked, we know the root cause. We know how to protect against that particular attack. All of that should be made available to the rest of the department immediately, automatically, without anybody having to touch it. And there's ways to do that, and they don't actually cost that much. They're actually free. So employ them. The second thing I would say is anything. We talked about the math problem. There's a finite number of people. There's a finite amount of budget, 24 hours in the day. So anything that reduces the labor on those practitioners has to be employed. And the public cloud is part of this, right? So let's say to secure a system takes one practitioner 10 hours. Just making this up. By contracting with a public cloud provider or a hybrid cloud provider like Northrop, the amount of labor that the practitioner has to spend goes down to only 4 hours because the cloud provider is providing 6 hours of that labor. You have to employ those techniques. You're not going to get more workers. We already talked about that. So you have to reduce the amount of labor. How do you do it? Automation, information sharing, cloud technologies.
Thank you. Dr. Pape.
I think if I could make one additional recommendation, it would be for the new administration at DHS to go back and look at that 2012 Homeland Security Advisory Council Task Force on Cyber Skills report, where we laid out 11 recommendations and refresh it a little bit, look at it again with a new eye and say, hey, that was 5 years ago. How many of these are still valid? How many of these haven't we done? Should we pick up a couple of more and really push? Because that was a lot of effort by a lot of people across academia and government and industry to participate in that effort.
Terrific. Ms. Okafor.
One of the things I think is a key way for the public sector to benefit from the private sector ingenuity and innovation is USA Jobs. I myself have taken the steps of trying to apply for jobs in the federal government and found a job in the private sector. So I can imagine that there are lots of people who perhaps would be interested in working for the government who just are daunted by the process. And if anything, Google, Facebook, the McAfees and the Northrop Grummans of the world, they figured some of that stuff out. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So why not use some of that work that's already been done so we don't have to completely innovate. We're just enhancing some of the things we know have already been done. So I would say I do believe that there is some of this that could be focused on technology, but easily the private sector could help with some of the hiring practices through the system currently existing. Thanks.
Very good. Would the gentlelady from Florida like to be recognized? Well, very good then. I really want to thank the witnesses for your insightful and thoughtful and, frankly, very valuable testimony today. I also want to thank the members for their questions. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for some of you, and we'd ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for a period of 10 days, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.